Hello everybody, Dylan Stevens, Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist. In today's video, I wanted to discuss the difference between mobility and flexibility. So most people might mix the two up and think that they're the same thing, but in reality, they are very different with very different implications. So let's discuss the differences. So first, let's talk about flexibility. So flexibility is the ability for a joint to passively move through a range of motion. So this is probably best understood as grabbing your toes and pulling down to stretch your hamstrings. Your quads and your hip flexors are not activated in order to stretch that hamstring. You're actively pulling with other muscles to stretch the hamstring out, and the hamstring is completely turned off. So that is what flexibility is. Flexibility is the ability for a joint to passively move through a range of motion. So mobility is the ability for a joint to actively move through a range of motion. So this is the difference between going down and touching your toes, and grabbing your toes and pulling yourself down with your arms to stretch your hamstrings, and standing straight up and lifting your leg straightened as far out as you possibly can using your hip flexors and your quad. So that is the main difference between flexibility and mobility. Mobility has a lot more implications for day-to-day activities. I mean, not very often are you just taking a muscle through its full range of motion passively, either through external forces or other muscles. So it's really important that you make sure that you're training mobility more so than flexibility. When you gain flexibility, you're increasing your risk of injury in that new range of motion, and that's because you're simply stretching that muscle out. You're not training it to be stronger within that new range of motion. So honestly, the best form of gaining range of motion is actually lifting weights. So when you want more flexible hamstrings, you should not just go down and touch your toes and do that for 10 minutes every day. In some cases, doing that is appropriate because some people might have had injuries and they're so limited in their range of motion that they need some passive flexibility training in order just to get back to a healthy range. But most people should do some form of RDL or deadlift in order to train their flexibility or their mobility so they can get stronger within the new ranges of motion that they're acquiring. So the other important part of gaining mobility is that you're actually training the antagonist muscles. So when you're doing bicep curls, the biceps are the agonists. They're the main movers of the movement. And the triceps are the antagonists. They're the opposing muscle that performs the opposing action. So the biceps will be focusing on elbow flexion. Triceps are the antagonist, and they perform elbow extension. So say you're a baseball player and you want to increase your throwing velocity. One of the parts of increasing your throwing velocity is your ability to separate your hips being facing forward from your shoulders facing to the side. So you don't want to just go up to a bar, put your arm up against it and try to just, flex your chest or stretch your chest and stretch your torso through that. You want to actually train the muscles that pull you back into that position so that new range of motion isn't weak, it's strong, because you train the other muscles to actually pull you back into that position, and you don't have to rely on external forces to get you into that new position. But like I said earlier, flexibility can be important in certain ways. So if you recently were injured and you have extremely limited range of motion, that's when stretching passively can help you quite a bit. Also, there's recovery techniques, there's recovery implications for passive stretching. If you have a really sore chest or really sore legs, stretching them out lightly will help with blood flow and nutrient delivery to the damaged tissues. But for the most part, stretching just to stretch, I mean, if you want to just, be able to do a split or say you have tight inner thighs preventing you from getting to a deep squat, it's probably a good idea to stretch out those inner thighs just so you can squat to depth before your workout. But if you do want to stretch, you should probably stick to post-workout stretching, just because you're not gaining more range of motion without training it for strength.